Gulf countries have declared Hezbollah a terrorist organization. It's part of a deepening rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran that's playing out in Lebanon and elsewhere. Will this have an effect on Hezbollah's influence? And what will this mean for Iran's role in the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hanna. Lebanon has long been an arena for competing regional powers, and as the war in Syria drags on, regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran have sought to maintain their influence over the border in Lebanon. Iran is, of course, the patron of the powerful Shia armed group Hezbollah, a major player in Lebanese politics. And now Saudi Arabia, along with its allies in the Gulf Cooperation Council, have declared Hezbollah a terrorist organization, a move Iran says will undermine regional peace efforts. Lots for us to discuss today, but first Al Jazeera's Mohamed helps set up our conversation.
The Gulf Cooperation Council's formal designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization is significant. Many say it will have a wide-ranging impact across the region.
This is actually a big deal because Saudi Arabia is putting some order within the alliance. As we know in previous times, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, along with Bahrain and the Emirates, had already designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Now what we have is the addition of Kuwait, Qatar, and especially the Sultanate of Oman.
An escalation that indicates how Lebanon, where Hezbollah is based, finds itself once again on the front lines of a regional power struggle. Coming as it does less than 2 weeks after Saudi Arabia announced it was cutting $4 billion in aid to Lebanon's army. And a week after Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Bahrain warned their citizens against traveling to Lebanon and urged any of their citizens in Lebanon to leave. The decision, which Iran called a mistake, underscores the regional division between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Hezbollah's backer. Much of the growing tension can be traced back to January, when the Saudi Arabian embassy in Iran was stormed by protesters. They were protesting against Saudi Arabia's execution of the prominent Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr. In a televised address on Tuesday, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah accused the Saudi government of punishing Lebanon.
Does Saudi Arabia have the right to sanction Lebanon, the Lebanese army, the Lebanese state, the Lebanese people, and the Lebanese residing in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, just because one particular party took a certain position and raised its voice?
The GCC, however, insists the bloc decided to formally designate Hezbollah a terrorist organization because of what it calls hostile acts by the armed group within its member states, as well as other countries in the region. Analysts say the GCC is determined to stop Hezbollah.
I think that the Gulf countries are pretty much determined not to allow Hezbollah, a militia, to determine the fate not just of what goes on in Lebanon, but also because of the militia's involvement in Syria, in Iraq, as well as in Yemen.
Just days ago came more serious accusations from Saudi Arabia and Yemen that Hezbollah was aiding Houthi rebels to plot and carry out attacks in both countries. For the moment, though, it's Lebanon, a tiny country whose sectarian divisions run deep, that could be most affected. Mohamed for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guest for this Inside Story. Joining us in Beirut, Jamil Wakim. He's a professor of history and international relations at the Lebanese University of Beirut. In Tunis, Nicholas No, director of the Beirut Exchange and author of the book Voice of Hezbollah. And joining us from Manama on Skype is Omar Mohamed, research analyst with the Bahrain Center for Strategic, International and Energy Studies and co-author of the book The Gulf Military Balance. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Jamil Wakim. What do you believe lies behind the Gulf states' decision to label Hezbollah a terrorist organization?
Well, I believe that this move by Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries comes at a time when the Syrian regime in Syria, the Syrian army, alongside its allies, including Hezbollah, are gaining ground in Syria, and at the same time, at the time when Hezbollah is accused by the GCC countries of blocking any breakthrough, political breakthrough regarding the vacuum in power in Lebanon, because we didn't have a president for the past 2 years. And the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, including Saudi Arabia, are blaming Hezbollah for blocking this process, in addition of accusations to Hezbollah of supporting the Houthis in Yemen against the Saudis, and of supporting other groups, resistance groups, for example, in Palestine against the will of the GCC countries. So I believe that this is the reason that led Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries to take this step or to take this decision.
Well, a list of issues there. Omar, Mohamed, what's your view? What do you think the fundamental reason is behind the action of the Gulf states?
Well, as Secretary General Abdulatif Ziani said, it's a whole host of issues, including terrorist activity by the group. You see it in Bahrain, in Saudi, and Kuwait. It's just been increasing. We found bomb-making facilities linked to Hezbollah and the IRGC. Several elements of the opposition have been known to go and visit Nasrallah, showing direct and blatant interference in the affairs of GCC states. There's ample evidence of Hezbollah collusion with the Houthis. In fact, there's a new video which shows Hezbollah member in Yemen discussing a soon-to-come operation in Riyadh. So you have all these blatant acts of terrorism going on. And then, as our guest just pointed out, they have interrupted the political process in Lebanon consistently. And for the Gulf states, they're not getting anything back in return for all their investments and generosity towards the country. You just keep hearing Nasrallah threatening the Gulf all the time, their chance of death chance to different members of the royal family and his speeches. We should understand and take into consideration, this is a party, Hezbollah, which calls itself the party of God, and it claims to be leading the resistance, yet it is taking part in killing innocent civilians in Syria, in Yemen, in the Gulf. It's not fighting Israel in any of these countries, in Iraq. So this is a serious issue for the Gulf states.
Well, Nicholas, no, Hassan Nasrallah has asked the question of, if there are differences with Hezbollah, why is Lebanon as a whole being punished with the withdrawal of the aid money? What's your view of that comment?
Yeah, well, you're referring to the aid money, the $3 to $4 billion that was promised by the Saudi royal family to support the Lebanese armed forces. Nasrallah, of course, would wish that the Saudis would focus only on Hezbollah and not hurt the rest of Lebanon, because that creates political problems for Hezbollah back at home, when it would like very much to keep things quiet as it involves itself in regional conflagrations. It's an attempt to try and show that the Saudi royal family and the GCC at large is making this a personal issue somehow, as well as a political and policy issue about Hezbollah. And Nasrallah is trying to say to Lebanese and to its own constituents, some of whom are going to be hurt in these coming months and weeks as we see how this GCC action unfolds. Remember, there are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese working in the Gulf. He's trying to deflect the inevitable criticism that we're seeing by Lebanese and the concerns among many Lebanese that they are going to be paying the price for Hezbollah foreign policy, essentially, which is outside of the scope of the democratically elected government of Lebanon. That being said, Nasrallah also has a very interesting point, which I'd like to add to the other two speakers, which is we cannot discount the personal aspect of the politics here. We're not talking about a normal state, Saudi Arabia, as we would in many other parts of the world. We're talking about a royal family with thousands of princes. There are intense personal dynamics and personal grievances, some of which have been going on for about 10 years or so, between Hezbollah leaders, and some in the Gulf, and especially in Saudi Arabia. Right now, there is a growing analysis that the Saudi royal family, with the new king of the last year, new leadership and the deputy crown prince, is undergoing tremendous changes and possibly also some internal conflicts within the kingdom. This is really important to understand because it's outside of the normal, what we would consider rational state-to-state or a state actor versus a non-state actor kind of relations. We cannot discount the personal aspect. And Nasrallah is trying to say that essentially the Saudis have gotten personal and they're trying to make all the Lebanese pay for a personal spat with Hezbollah that has very little to do with state-to-state or state-to-non-state interests.
Well,
I don't know if he's necessarily going to win
apologies for
that
interrupting, Nicholas, but let me go to...
He might not win it in Lebanon either.
Let me go to Jamil Wakim on that point that you are making there, the personal nature of this interaction between Saudi Arabia and Hezbollah in particular. Your view of that?
Well, I believe that there is an issue at stake between Hezbollah on one hand and the crown prince, the vice crown prince in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Well, I believe that there were a lot of irrational steps taken by the Saudi leadership, because if we take the last step, which is to consider Hezbollah as a terrorist group, what impact would it have on Hezbollah per se? I don't believe that it would have any impact, because Hezbollah was on the terrorist list of the West for too long, and it was able to adjust and deal with this issue, and it became, in spite of this, an integral part of Lebanese politics and of Lebanese government. And the ally of Saudi Arabia in Lebanon, Mr. Saad Hariri, is still insisting on having dialogue with Hezbollah. So how would this proceed to a dialogue with a group that is considered by Saudi Arabia as a terrorist group? So I don't believe that it would have any impact on the finances or on the political position of Hezbollah inside Lebanon, nor on the political role of Hezbollah in other areas, whether in Syria or in Yemen. So I believe that this step doesn't have any practical impact or tangible results on Hezbollah. So it would only express anger on behalf of the Saudi leadership and its most prominent decision maker now, which is the Vice Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Well, there's a couple of points there that I will come back to, but Omar Mohamed, I want to put to you the issue of whether Saudi Arabia is not concerned that it will lose influence within Lebanon by effectively withdrawing from a relationship with affairs in that country. Your view?
Look, we need to understand this is not something that's permanent. The Lebanese people and the GCC people have a long, fruitful and brotherly relationship. What we need to understand is that year by year, we've been seeing Lebanon, and because of Hezbollah, move closer and closer to Iran. This has been going on even though the Gulf countries and Saudi have been really trying to invest in the country, trying to improve the political situation, reach some sort of compromise. We've been hearing a lot of talk since the announcement was made that this is quite an irrational and impulsive move. In fact, if you look at the history, the Gulf states have been very patient. They've had their allies sit on the table, continuously try to talk, try to put some sense into Hezbollah to stop its belligerent actions. And then we have to look at the state of Lebanon itself. Hezbollah, apparently the figure is out of every 4 Lebanese, 1 is a Syrian citizen, a Syrian refugee. The state infrastructure is completely depleted. You have rivers of garbage flowing through the streets. So they're just seeing a dire situation becoming worse and worse year by year. So it's time, and if you look at the region as a whole, there are just far too many simultaneous priorities that need to be dealt with from a Gulf perspective. There are failing states everywhere, if not failed states. Lebanon is on the verge of that itself. So the Gulf states have, in effect, tried to cut its losses here. No one has put a strong voice against Hezbollah. No one has stood up to them the way they should. As our friend from Lebanon just said, Hezbollah will never change its behavior. because in order for that to happen, it either means Iran has accepted it or that Hezbollah is breaking away from Iran.
Well,
Neither
let
of
me
the
just
two
go to Nicholas No, if I may, Omar. Apologies for interrupting. Nicholas, I want to refer to something that Professor Wakim mentioned, that there may not be a political impact on Hezbollah within Lebanon, and yet within days of the military aid being suspended, the Lebanese Justice Minister, Ashraf Rifi, resigned, once again causing a little bit of eruption within political circles. Is there going to be political impact on Hezbollah because of the Gulf decision?
There could be. It depends on how the Saudis and their Gulf allies push forward conflict in Lebanon in this next period. And that has yet to be seen. It's a bit of inside baseball, but the resignation of the hawkish, very pro-Saudi Minister of Justice was an important development and a very negative development if it's followed by other steps. For example, another hawk that's pro-Saudi and within the Future Movement Party that is somehow opposed to Hezbollah but also in a national unity government, the Interior Minister Mashnouk actually stayed and is staying in the government. And he was just here in Tunis yesterday and refused to sign an Arab Interior Minister's statement that called Hezbollah a terrorist organization. Now that's an important development and a sign that even Saudi's allies within Lebanon are not sure about the reasonability, the rationality of the Saudi and GCC moves. And that brings really to the 2 points that Omar just made, which I think are very important to draw out, where he said that the region is on fire. The GCC and all these states have a number of really pressing things to deal with and really big problems to deal with. And that also it's probably not going to really affect Hezbollah much. If we accept Omar's arguments on those 2 points, then what is the rationality? Why does it make sense to use the GCC levers of power, like withdrawing aid and terrorism lists, etc.? Why does it make sense right now to push Lebanon into greater instability? It's not going to really affect Hezbollah, certainly in the short and probably medium term. And more than that, it's going to create the possibility of yet another failed state in the Middle East and North Africa.
Well, Jamil Wakim, the whole issue of Lebanese politics, the delicate balance that one finds within that country, that could be easily tilted, as Nicholas is saying, by this type of action. Hezbollah, the future movement, both part of the unity government, they do have to communicate if there is going to be ongoing calm and peace, do they not?
Well, I fully agree with this approach because Lebanon has always been a reflection of regional and international balance of power. So that's why after 1990, there was a consent between three powers, which are Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the United States, to divide influence in Lebanon. So this ended in 2005 with the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri back then. And Lebanon, with the crisis in Syria, one major player in Lebanese politics got withdrawn, and the vacuum got filled out partially by Iran and by Hezbollah and the allies of Hezbollah. But at this time, when we have a new regional power that would emerge, that has yet to emerge actually, we need to wait and see, because Iran is gaining influence in the region, especially after the nuclear agreement. Saudi Arabia is losing ground in the region, and that's why it's getting very anxious on keeping its influence in Lebanon. And at the same time, the United States has shown its interest in keeping stability, economic stability, and support to the armed to the Lebanese army. And that's why there was a declaration by an American diplomat in Lebanon that telling 14th of March coalition that the United States is against any economic instability or against jeopardizing the stance of the army, which was
let me go, if I may, Jamil. Apologies for
reaction.
interruption there, but I'd like to go to Omar Mohamed on some of those points you've made. Also the point that Nicholas Snow brought up, is it indeed in Saudi Arabia's interests to allow Lebanon to descend into chaos, to become yet another failed state in the region?
Many would make the argument that I'm not sure if it would go that way. Also, I have to point out, many would make the argument that Hezbollah has already made Lebanese Iranian satellite state. This is, as was mentioned earlier by, I think in the comments that was being made, this is not a move to punish the Lebanese people in any way whatsoever. In fact, if you've seen the reactions that have come out, people have somewhat woken up now. There was a sense of just muddling on through. People were just quiet, tolerating the vacuum in power, the caretaker government, nothing being done, the state not behaving as a state. Now people have opened their eyes and realized, look, we are not heading in the right direction. There are consequences to pay for inaction, for not standing up to basically what amounts to a terrorist group, which is imposing its will on the entire Lebanese people. So there, as I said, this is not permanent. There are already plenty of moves, backroom talks going on. Saad Hariri has made it clear he will not give up. So there is that sense. What Saudi and the Gulf states need is a united front that takes in the interests of all the Lebanese people, not specific sects or different religious groups in the country, but the entire country so it can move forward. Lebanon, and Beirut more specifically, used to be called the Paris of the Middle East once upon a time. Unfortunately, it is being dragged down the completely opposite way year by year. The Gulf states have to then look, what is the benefit of this? Say they went through with the arms deal, provided the $3 billion for the military and the $1 billion for the security services. Would anything really change? Would the military feel empowered to change things for the better, or would things still muddle on through? You can just speculate on that, but I think after over a decade of just deteriorating situation, the GCC states have had to take action.
Well, very quickly, if I may go to Nicholas Snow, we had reference there to the military. Now, the military is the glue that has held Lebanese society together. The military is a direct attack from Saudi Arabia, withdrawing the $3 billion from military hardware. Isn't this going to have an impact too on Lebanese society, that the pride of the country, the military which has held it together, coming under direct attack, some would argue, from Saudi Arabia?
It absolutely doesn't make sense from a security perspective. If the Saudis are concerned about the stability and security of Lebanon, the Lebanese army is fighting al-Qaeda and ISIS on the borders, along with Hezbollah, who's also fighting there as well. So it doesn't make sense from a security perspective. It also doesn't make sense because the Lebanese army is probably the most important alternative power center to Hezbollah, and could potentially be in the future, given the peaceful or a peace track in Syria, a cooling down of the region. This could be a real alternative balance of power to Hezbollah's armed presence in Lebanon and beyond. But I think, Mike, it's really important to take this in a larger context. Saudi Arabia and the monarchies in general are not just listing Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, they're also listing the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm sitting here in a country, Tunisia, where the Muslim Brotherhood is in a power-sharing agreement with the secular party here. It's Nahda is here. It is not rational to look at a place like Tunisia and say that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization when this country just won the Nobel Peace Prize, for example. What's the importance of this? We have to be very concerned that the monarchies in the Middle East are looking at this purely from a very narrow, self-interested perspective of keeping their monarchies in power in perpetuity, and rejecting not only people like Hezbollah, you may consider them terrorists or not, but also democratically elected groups, of which Hezbollah is partially, like the Muslim Brotherhood, such as here in Tunisia. That is a future of a Middle East that after the Arab Spring, the monarchies were very concerned about.
Well, at that particular point, I'm afraid we've just run out of time for this particular show. My thanks to all our guests, Jamil, Wakim, Nicholas Snow, and Omar Mohamed. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.